Now, the Prime Minister has promised more than £40 million of funding to fix flood defences overwhelmed by storms this Christmas. But the government's been accused of failing to grasp the severity of climate change, on which the extreme weather is being blamed. Amongst those critics, of course, is the Green Party's leader, Natalie Bennett. And she's with me right now, and very good to see you. And I just want you to respond to what we heard from the Shadow Transport Secretary there, because I know you were listening with great interest. They're not going to be stealing any votes off the Green Party then on their airport policy, I guess.
Well, I think it's very disappointing to see such a weak position there. It's very clear that we cannot have further airport capacity in the southeast. Expansion of that doesn't fit with the climate change targets. The impact of climate change, we're already seeing what a 1 degree world looks like, a 1 degree warmed world looks like. That's what we're living in now. Expansion of aviation is no way forward. What we need to be doing, and also it was very disappointing to get a very weak response on cycling. Yeah. What we need to do, we are also opposed to HS2, so we entirely disagree on that point too. We want to see investment in transport. We want to see investment starting with walking and cycling, local buses, which have been slashed around the country. One of the things I find when I go around the country is people say, my life has just been thrown into turmoil by the fact there's not a local bus service anymore. How do people get to work? How do people get to community events? How do people see their family when they've lost their local bus services? And of course, we desperately need to improve rail services in the north, but not with the HS2, which is focusing money, people, resources even more on London, but instead, cross-country east-west routes that link up parts of the north and encourage development there, not bring even more focus down on London.
Well, let's talk about, and you touched on it there, of course, the major part of this interview, about the flooding. And you have no doubt, then, that this is linked to climate change, because we must be aware, mustn't we, that no one single event or group of events can be definitively linked to climate change. And there are thoughtful scientists there saying, well, there's been this big shift in El Nino and Pacific currents and warm airs, and in actual fact, that's not necessarily unusual.
Of course, any single event is weather. But what we know is under climate change, we're going to see more extreme weather events more often, and particularly rainfall. And there's some basic physics here, which is that warm air holds more water. That's the nature of it. And what we're seeing is 6 of the 7 wettest years on record in Britain have been since the year 2000. We are in extreme conditions. Things are changing. There's one calculation that says 40% of the blame for this is climate change. That's just one person's calculation, but or 40% more likely because of this. So these, there's calculations out there, but there's no doubt at all that we are now living in a 1 degree warm world. It is now overall 1 degree warmer than it was in pre-industrial times. And one of the really exciting things of last year was that we got the agreement in Paris, better than was expected, to agree to work towards limiting that increase to 1.5. And that's really important, and that's a huge step forward globally. Of course, sadly, in Britain...
Just to bring it back to flooding and flood defences, because, we know the pot is limited, the spending pot is limited, and these events are called once-in-a-100-year events, and they affect specific parts. Of course, let's not denigrate, let's not play down the effects on people, but the vast majority of the UK is not affected on a grand scale by flooding, but the money comes from all their taxes. We have to think about where we want to prioritise, don't we?
And the fact is, of course, pretty well all around the UK, there's risk certainly from localised flooding. And one of the issues, and where I've really said that David Cameron has utterly failed over the 6 years that he's been Prime Minister, is not just flood defences, which have clearly been cut away unreasonably and left people at risk, people who are suffering right now. But there's also the much broader issue of how that we ensure that we reduce the risk of flooding all around the country. And that means looking at total catchment management, looking at planting trees, particularly in upland areas, looking at managing water flows in urban areas, sustainable urban drainage, rural sustainable drainage, schemes that basically, I was down on the Somerset levels last month. The slogan is slow the flow. If a lot of rain falls and if you hold that on the land that it's fallen on for longer, then you're much less likely to get flooding downstream. And the government has simply failed to make any progress in that area.
Just wanted to ask you about, we've got a lot of elections coming up for your party, Scotland, London, local elections.
And Wales.
Well, let's not leave that out. Your vote, though, doesn't seem to be holding up, does it? I mean, we just had that snapshot in Oldham, didn't we, where there was a 3/4 cut in the number of people who voted Green from the general election just to that by-election.
Well, of course, what's coming up in terms of the elections coming up is, first of all, in the London Assembly, the Welsh Assembly and the Scottish Parliament with our sister party up there. These are fair proportional representation elections. People know that their vote counts, and I'm expecting to see very strong results in all of those. But what we're also seeing is local council elections up and down the country, and each one of these is a local race. And of course, the Green Party last year, our membership more than trebled. We've seen scores of new parties up and down the country who are out. Yesterday, I was up in Cannock, where we've got a local party that's barely a year old, doing great work, working with a local alliance, Save Our Countryside. So up and down the country, we're looking to really grow our number of Green councillors to turn the Green surge of last year, the trebling of our membership, into Green seats.
But, I mean, it is being said, isn't it, and not just from those associated with your party, that there is a bit of a danger, isn't there, from a Corbyn-led Labour Party, that they're cutting the ground from under you. I mean, they're much more to the left, of course.
Well, I think it's interesting. I mean, we've seen the transport interview that we've just seen, whether it's HS2, airport runways or cycling, we've just seen some very clear lines in the sand of division on that.
But that's if you stick to your environmental agenda.
Well, but if we also stick to the fact that we've said we want to get rid of the work capability assessment that's hit disabled people very hard, that's something we've been campaigning on very strongly. You look at the European referendum that's coming up, we're the people who are saying we celebrate the free movement of people in the EU. We're saying that we in terms of treatment of asylum seekers, treatment of refugees, we need a very different approach. We're saying that very different things to other parties are.
I just want a quick thought on Saudi Arabia, pretty unsavoury regime in terms of those number of executions. Do you think we ought to start looking at ties, even cutting ties with it?
I think very much so, and the place to start is we should stop immediately arms exports to Saudi Arabia. I mean, this is a regime that is behaving in total disregard for any kind of human rights, any respect for international law. The Sheikh Nimr al-Nimr, who they executed, the UN Secretary General was campaigning for his release. This is a peaceful democracy campaigner who has just been executed. And I think one of the things there hasn't been much focus on, perhaps because it is so awful, is they displayed the bodies of those executed men on gibbets after they were executed. That's the kind of regime that we're fawning to, we're treating as a friend and ally, we're bending over backwards. And the government's response to this has been totally inadequate. And it's very disturbing.
OK, Natalie Bennett, good to see you. Thank you very much.